I knew something was off the second I saw the ladder sticking out of my attic hatch. It was a Sunday morning, my one day to sleep in, and I was jolted awake by the sound of boots scraping across the ceiling above my bedroom. I live alone, so unless squirrels had suddenly learned how to wear Timberlands, someone was in my attic. I grabbed my phone, slipped on my work boots, and quietly made my way to the hallway. I looked up and nearly had a stroke. There, halfway through the attic opening, was none other than Karrenna Bloomfield, vice president of our HOA, staring down at me like I had broken into her house. "Oh, you startled me," she said, like she hadn't just broken into my home. "Karrenna, what the hell are you doing in my attic?" I asked, stunned. She stepped down the ladder like it was her own personal staircase. "Yorick, don't be dramatic. I had reason to believe you were storing unauthorized construction materials. As a member of the HOA board, I have every right to investigate. You broke into my house." She crossed her arms, all smug and self-important. "You left your back gate unlocked. I simply entered through the side yard and used the emergency override key." My jaw dropped. "Emergency override what? How do you even have a key to my gate?" "Oh, please," Karrenna sniffed. "All HOA board members have access to the community override keys. It's policy." "No, it's not," I snapped. "And even if it was, that doesn't give you the right to break into my attic." At this point, I pulled out my phone and started recording. Karrenna immediately tried to wave it away, but I wasn't letting her off that easy. "You're trespassing. You entered my home without consent. You're getting arrested." She scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. The HOA has legal authority to inspect properties." "Not like this," I said, dialing the sheriff's office. "Not by illegally entering homes." Karrenna finally started to look nervous. "Yorick, let's not overreact. We can resolve this like adults." I was just trying to make sure everyone was following community guidelines. By invading my attic, I called the sheriff and kept recording while she paced in my hallway, muttering about bylaws and community standards. 20 minutes later, a deputy showed up. I showed him the footage. Karrenna tried to argue, but the deputy shut her down fast. "You're not law enforcement. You can't just enter someone's home," he told her. "You're under arrest for trespassing and unlawful entry." Watching her get cuffed on my front porch was the most satisfying moment of my year. But that was just the start. 2 days after Karrenna's arrest, I was sitting across from Detective Elena Maris at the county sheriff's office, flipping through a stack of official documents she'd laid out on the table. "You're telling me this wasn't just a one-time thing?" I asked, eyebrows raised. Elena nodded, tapping a highlighted section of a report. "Since she's been on the HOA board, there have been at least 5 other complaints that sound eerily similar. Residents reporting missing items from garages, sheds opened without permission, even a few unlocked doors mysteriously found ajar." "That's breaking and entering," I said flatly. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Technically, yes. But most of the victims dropped it after being intimidated or hit with sudden HOA fines and citations. People get scared when their homes are targeted, and then their mailbox fills up with threats about noncompliance exemptions and emergency penalties." "And she's been doing this under the guise of HOA enforcement?" I asked. "Exactly. She's been using her position to push into properties and inspect them, usually when no one's home. You're the first one to catch her red-handed and record it." I glanced down at the incident report again. "So what happens next?" "She's already been arraigned. The judge issued a temporary restraining order as a condition of her release. She's not allowed within 50 feet of your property or to initiate any contact with you. But if you're willing to pursue this further, we can build a solid case." I didn't hesitate. "I want to press full charges." "She shouldn't be allowed to use her position to bully people and violate homes." Elena nodded. "Then we'll need a full statement. And I'll need you to turn over the full video, not just the clip you posted online." I handed her the USB drive I'd brought. "It's all there. I've got 3 cameras in the hallway, and they caught her entering and leaving. Sound and everything." She took it and stood. "You may have just opened the door to taking apart the entire HOA board." When I got back home, my front lawn looked like a crime scene. Not because of the incident, but because someone had dumped 3 bags of shredded paper all over it. Black garbage bags torn open, the paper scattered like snow across the grass. My neighbor, Mr. Delaney, was already outside with a rake. Saw a white SUV drive off about 20 minutes ago. Could have sworn it was one of the HOA board members, but I can't say for sure. I crouched and picked up a few of the shredded pieces. "This looks like printed documents." HOA letterhead. He squinted. Think they're trying to send a message? I looked at the nearest piece part of someone's architectural review request, sliced into ribbons. They're trying to destroy evidence. I spent the next hour picking up every scrap while documenting the entire thing with photos. I wasn't about to let them clean up their mess and pretend nothing happened. If Karrenna was shredding HOA files, it meant she wasn't working alone. By that evening, I had emailed everything to Elena with a note attached. Found this dumped on my lawn, looks like your suspect's trying to erase her tracks. The next morning, I got a call. Elena here. We ran the shredded paper through our lab. You were right. Internal HOA documents. Some of them are from private homeowner files, things like dispute resolutions, fine schedules, even complaints against Karrenna herself. I rubbed my eyes. So she was destroying files that could incriminate her. More than that. We found altered versions of the same documents in the HOA's official filing system. She was modifying records to fabricate violations. That stopped me cold. So those random citations people were getting, she made them up? In several cases, yes. We're building a timeline now. But listen, Yorick, we're gonna need you to come down again. There's something else. When I arrived at the station, Elena pulled me into a smaller office and closed the door. We did a deeper dive into Karrenna's access logs for the HOA's internal platform. She's been logging into other board members' accounts using the master admin key. That's how she's been approving her own reports and issuing fines. I stared at her. That's fraud. That's tampering with official records. It gets worse, she said, pulling up a spreadsheet. She rerouted several HOA fees into a shell account. Small amounts, $20 to $30 each, but over the last 2 years, she's skimmed close to $12,000. The air left my lungs. And no one caught it? She covered her tracks well. But now that we're looking, the pattern's obvious. And because you pressed charges, we were able to get a subpoena for the HOA's financial systems. My hands curled into fists. She's been stealing from the entire neighborhood and using that money to fund her little reign of terror. Elena nodded grimly. And now that we've got her on your case, we can fold in the rest of the charges. But we're going to need the neighborhood's support. That night, I called an emergency town meeting and invited every resident in the subdivision. I didn't go through the HOA, I printed flyers and passed them out myself. Word spread fast. By the next evening, over 50 people showed up at the community center. I stood at the front of the room, a projector behind me, and clicked through the slides. Video footage of Karrenna entering my attic, photos of the shredded documents, screenshots of fake fines issued to residents who'd never committed violations. Gasps echoed through the room. One woman burst into tears when she saw her name on a fabricated citation for unauthorized window tinting. She'd paid over $600 in fines over the last year. When I reached the financial breakdown, the room fell silent. She stole from all of us, I said. And if I hadn't caught her in the act, she would have kept going. Someone in the back stood up. Mr. Alvarez, a retired IRS auditor. I can help track the missing funds. I know how to follow money. Another hand went up. Barbara Tomlin, who ran a small legal clinic downtown. I've got 3 clients in this neighborhood who were unfairly fined. I'll represent any homeowner here, pro bono, if they want to file civil charges. I nodded. We need to vote to suspend the entire board until this is resolved. We hold an emergency election. We get transparency. People began clapping. A few shouted in agreement. We took a vote right there. Unanimous. By the end of the night, we had a 7-person interim committee, including Mr. Alvarez and Barbara. I wasn't interested in running, but I offered to help document everything and act as liaison with the sheriff's office. 2 days later, Karrenna violated the restraining order. She showed up at my house just past sunset, parked across from my driveway, and sat in her car with the engine running. I didn't approach. I didn't even step outside. I just turned on the exterior camera, called the sheriff's office, and waited. She didn't move until the patrol car pulled up behind her. When she saw the lights, she tried to drive off, but they boxed her in. They arrested her on the spot for violating the restraining order, and this time, she wasn't getting released. Elena called me the next morning. She's being held without bail. The judge reviewed the new charges: wire fraud, identity theft, misappropriation of funds, criminal trespass. She's not getting out this time. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued for the remaining board members. 2 of them resigned within hours. The other 3 claimed ignorance, but the digital logs told a different story. Elena said they were all being investigated. I stood on my porch that Friday, watching the last of the shredded paper finally get cleared off my lawn by a city maintenance crew. Mr. Delaney walked by with his dog and gave me a nod. "You really stirred the hornet's nest," he said. I nodded. "Good." It needed stirring. By the following week, the interim committee had taken full control of the HOA office. The building itself was a converted carriage house near the community tennis courts, modest, but packed with filing cabinets, 2 outdated computers, and the faint smell of stale coffee and mildew. Barbara and Mr. Alvarez led the charge, backed by a rotating group of volunteers, combing through everything the old board had touched. On Tuesday morning, Barbara met me outside the office with a folder clutched tight under her arm and a look I hadn't seen on her before, somber, almost pale. "We found something," she said, without preamble. "You need to see it." Inside, she laid the folder on the folding table that now served as the HOA's central desk. She opened it slowly, revealing a paper trail that made my stomach turn. The documents weren't just doctored fine notices or tampered architectural reviews. These were purchase orders, real ones signed off by Karrenna and 2 other former board members. Barbara tapped the topmost sheet. They used HOA funds to pay a private contractor, a demolition consultant. "For what?" I asked, already hearing the answer. "Property seizure. Specifically, the 2 lots on the east side of the neighborhood near the retention pond." "That's public easement," I said. "It's protected. You can't build on that." They didn't plan to build. They planned to claim it, clear it, and flip it to a third-party developer. There's an email from Karrenna authorizing the start of Phase 1. She refers to it as quiet reclamation. Mr. Alvarez pulled up a chair and dropped a manila envelope onto the table. She'd been working with a title agent. They filed false claims of abandonment on both lots, then submitted a forged affidavit claiming HOA inheritance rights. "That's not just fraud," I said. "That's land theft." Barbara nodded. "We've already turned it over to the district attorney. They're opening a formal investigation. But there's more." She flipped to the next page. It was a payment log, not digital handwritten, with amounts and initials. Beside one of the entries was a name I recognized, Officer Darren Feld. "That's a sheriff's deputy," I said. Barbara corrected. "He resigned 2 days ago. Internal Affairs is reviewing his connection to the HOA. Apparently, he signed off on several of their more aggressive code enforcements. And now we know why he was on the payroll." "Bribed," Mr. Alvarez said flatly. "They paid him to ignore complaints and fast-track citations." All at once, it clicked. The sudden surge in violations last spring, the selective enforcement, the homeowners who'd been harassed until they sold and moved out. It hadn't been coincidence. It had been a purge. They were forcing people out, I said, clearing the way. Barbara looked up. "And pocketing the resale fees." I leaned back in the folding chair, head spinning. "This went way deeper than we thought." "We've only scratched the surface," Mr. Alvarez said. "We found a locked drawer in the back office. We're filing a warrant to access it. Based on the invoices we did find, I'd bet there's cash involved." "How much?" I asked. Barbara glanced at the totals. "North of 80,000, all undocumented." That afternoon, I drove to the county administration building. I wasn't just interested in watching justice happen, I wanted the HOA bylaws rewritten from the ground up. I scheduled a meeting with Councilwoman Reva Harrell, who represented our district. She met me in a narrow office with walls covered in zoning maps and a window that looked out over the courthouse lawn. "I've heard about your case," she said, waving me in. "The Bloomfield incident. My office received a copy of the restraining order last week." "There's more," I told her. "A lot more. Embezzlement, property fraud, even evidence of collusion with a former sheriff's deputy." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's quite the list." I slid a summary packet across her desk. "We need oversight. State level." Our HOA had no checks. They created their own rules, enforced them selectively, and punished dissenters. She flipped through the packet, nodding slowly. "You're not the first community to raise alarms. But you might be the first with this level of documentation." "I want to propose a bill," I said. "Mandatory state audits for HOAs over a certain size. Transparency requirements. Disclosures for financial activity and member elections." "You want to regulate HOAs," she said, eyes narrowing with interest. "Someone has to. If this could happen in our neighborhood, it could happen anywhere." She leaned forward. "I'll sponsor it. But it won't be easy. The HOA lobby is well funded, and they'll fight it. I've got over 50 signatures from my neighborhood alone, I said. And more coming. We're not going away. She extended her hand. Then let's give them a reason to listen. By the time I got home, the interim committee had already posted a public notice for the upcoming special election. For the first time, it would be open ballot, with candidates required to disclose any conflicts of interest. Barbara's name was at the top of the candidate list. Mr. Alvarez had declined to run, preferring to remain an independent auditor. That night, I installed 2 new motion-sensitive lights along the side of my house. Not because I was afraid, because I was watching. And because people like Karrenna counted on darkness. The next morning, a patrol cruiser pulled into my driveway. Officer Valerie Min stepped out, new to the sheriff's department, sharp-eyed and direct. She handed me a sealed envelope. "Search warrant just came through for the drawer at the HOA office," she said. "You want to be there when we open it?" I nodded. "Absolutely." We returned to the office with Barbara and the locksmith she'd hired. The drawer popped open with one quick twist of the pick. Inside was a stack of file folders, a brown envelope, and a small fireproof lockbox. Barbara opened the envelope first. Inside were membership applications to a private club in the neighboring county, each one bearing the names of former board members, each one paid in full with HOA funds. "They were using our fees to pay their club dues," she said, voice tight. The lockbox contained cash, neatly bundled stacks of 20s and 50s, along with a ledger that listed dates, amounts, and cryptic notes like JM Favor and Deck Permit Expedite. Officer Min photographed everything. "We'll bag it and submit to evidence. This confirms the bribery accusations." Barbara found a USB drive taped beneath the drawer's underside. She plugged it into one of the computers and pulled up a folder labeled Archive. Inside were dozens of audio files. Recordings of board meetings, private conversations, even phone calls. We played one. Karrenna's voice came through clear. "Find them again. Double it. If they complain, cite them for landscaping violations. Eventually, they'll move. They always do." Barbara shut the file. "We've got her." And everyone who went along with it. I walked outside and sat on the front steps, letting the weight of everything settle. Across the street, a pair of kids rode their bikes past the basketball court, laughing, carefree. The neighborhood was healing. Councilwoman Harrell called later that day. "Your bill is in draft. I'm calling it the Residential HOA Accountability Act. It'll be introduced next month." I could hear traffic in the background as she spoke, but her tone was crisp and energized. "I've already got 2 co-sponsors. And I think, with the right push, we can make this real." "We'll give it more than a push," I said. "We'll give it fuel." The local paper ran the story the next morning. Front page, HOA scandal uncovered. Residents expose years of fraud, corruption. They used a still from the security footage, Karrenna's shocked face at the moment she stepped out of the attic. The caption read, "Caught in the act." People from neighboring communities reached out. Some wanted advice. Others wanted to join the legal action. Barbara began organizing a coalition of similarly affected neighborhoods. Mr. Alvarez started teaching a free course at the library, how to audit your HOA. And me? I went back to work, back to quiet mornings and late coffees, but I kept my cameras on, my files backed up, and my gate locked. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, you never stop looking. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, though. The air conditioning was a little aggressive, but in the way sound didn't seem to carry. Every cough, every shuffle, every click of a pen echoed like it didn't want to be heard. I sat behind the prosecution's table beside Barbara, who now wore her hair pulled back and carried herself like someone who had been preparing for this moment her whole life. Our new interim HOA committee had filed a civil suit against the former board, and the DA had filed criminal charges against Karrenna and 2 others. This was the first hearing where both cases would be discussed jointly. Across the aisle, Karrenna sat rigid in a charcoal blazer and a blouse that looked like it had never seen daylight. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. She wasn't looking at us. She was looking straight ahead at the judge's bench like she thought sheer force of will might collapse it. Barbara leaned over. "Judge Langley's got a background in white-collar crime. She doesn't play games. She'll need that today," I whispered back. The bailiff called the room to order just as Judge Langley stepped in. Her expression was unreadable, her gaze sweeping the room like she knew every secret we didn't want her to uncover. Then the opening statements began. Assistant District Attorney Priya Sharma stood first. She wore no jewelry, carried no notes. She didn't need them. This is not a case about a misunderstanding. It is not a case about overreach. It is a case about theft, deception, and the abuse of power. The defendant, Karrenna Bloomfield, used her position within a neighborhood association to commit acts that, under any other title, would be called what they are, criminal. She broke into homes. She falsified documents. She stole money. She intimidated homeowners with fraudulent fines and fabricated violations. And when she feared exposure, she attempted to destroy the evidence and silence those who questioned her. This case is not about an HOA. It is about a criminal enterprise masked by bureaucracy. Karrenna's lawyer, a wiry man named Doran Keats, stood with a practiced sigh. My client acted within the bounds of the authority granted to her by the community's governing documents. Did she make mistakes? Yes, but they were administrative. There was no intent to defraud, no malicious behavior, just misinterpretations and perhaps overzealous enforcement, but not crime. Barbara's eyes narrowed. He's setting her up for a plea. Not going to work, I said. Over the next 2 hours, the prosecution laid out everything we had uncovered since the investigation started. The altered digital records, the backdoor access through master login keys, the ghost fines, the private contractor payments, the shell account where HOA dues had vanished one small transaction at a time. When they played the audio recordings we'd recovered from the USB, the courtroom held its breath. I don't care if they've lived there 20 years, Karrenna's voice crackled through the speakers. If they can't follow the rules, they don't belong here. Hit them with another citation. They'll either pay or leave. Keats jumped up immediately. Your Honor, that recording was taken without consent. Langley didn't look up. She was discussing HOA enforcement inside a public building funded by the HOA itself. The expectation of privacy does not apply. Sit down. When the prosecution brought up the title fraud, it was the first time I saw Karrenna's facade slip. Her lips parted slightly as if she was going to object herself, but nothing came out. The forged affidavits were traced directly to her computer. The notary stamp she used had been expired for 3 years, and the developer she'd been negotiating with had already handed over emails confirming her intent to sell the land under a false deed. Then came the witness testimonies. Mrs. Jameson, a retired school counselor, took the stand first. She described how she was cited for non-compliant fencing after she spoke against a budget increase at a community meeting. Her fence had been approved 5 years earlier by the same board. Then Marcus Bell, a local landscaper, testified that he'd been approached by Karrenna to dump excess mulch onto a neighbor's lawn under the guise of a compliance correction. When he refused, she threatened to report his business to the state licensing board. By the time I was called to the stand, Langley already looked like she had heard enough. But I spoke clearly and carefully anyway, describing everything from the day I found her in my attic to the night she parked across from my house in violation of the restraining order. I submitted the full security footage, and the court admitted it without objection. Keats didn't even cross-examine me. He just sat back and scribbled something in his notebook, his jaw tight. The most damning moment came when the sheriff's office forensic accountant took the stand. She walked the court through Karrenna's personal bank statements subpoenaed after probable cause had been established. The shell account was in her name. The transfers were regular and consistent. The total stolen amount came to just under $106,000. Karrenna's face went pale, but she didn't move. When the judge called for recess, Keats finally leaned in to whisper something to her. This time, she responded, but not with words. She shook her head, sharp and final. She's not taking a deal, Barbara said. Then she's going down swinging, I replied. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Langley returned to the bench after a 20-minute recess, and her voice cut through the courtroom like a scalpel. Ms. Bloomfield, the evidence presented is overwhelming and damning. You did not simply mismanage a community fund. You orchestrated a long-term, targeted campaign of fraud, intimidation, and deceit. You used your position of authority to exploit homeowners, manipulate legal processes, and enrich yourself at the expense of those you were meant to serve. You are hereby found guilty on all counts, including criminal trespass, wire fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of public funds. Karrenna didn't flinch, but her shoulders slumped, just slightly, like the weight of it had finally begun to settle. Langley continued. You are sentenced to 9 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 6. You will also pay full restitution to the community, as determined by the court-appointed auditor. As the bailiff approached to take her into custody, Karrenna finally turned to look at me. There was no apology in her eyes, just exhaustion. And maybe a flicker of disbelief that it had come to this. I didn't look away. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered on the steps applauded quietly as Barbara addressed the press. We came together because we believe that no one is above the rules, not even those who write them. This case wasn't just about one corrupt official. It was about standing up for transparency, accountability, and the right to feel safe in your own home. There were no celebratory parties that night. No big speeches. Just a steady trickle of neighbors stopping by each other's porches, nodding, talking quietly. The community had changed not just on paper, but in how people looked out for one another. 3 weeks later, the special election was held. Barbara was elected president by a landslide. The new board voted unanimously to adopt open book accounting, term limits for all officers, and a whistleblower protection clause that would ensure no future board member could retaliate against homeowners. The county announced a new oversight committee for HOA governance, with our neighborhood as its pilot case. Councilwoman Harrell's bill was now moving through the state legislature, with bipartisan support. As for me, I went back to my routines. My cameras stayed up, but they were just tools now, not lifelines. The gate stayed locked, the inbox stayed quiet, and the attic ladder stayed up where it belonged. But every so often, when I passed the community bulletin board and saw the new notices clear, concise, signed by actual names instead of initials, I smiled. We hadn't just taken back our homes. We'd reclaimed our peace.